I've been delighted with what I've seen in my patients, what I've been able to witness in the children that they have raised. In Yiddish there's a word, naches, which means the glory that you get from the good work that you've done. And my naches is continuous from patients that I've treated. This is a kind of bragging, but I'll indulge myself. I have 5 books dedicated to me, and by significant people, by professors of philosophy at NYU in Columbia, by professors of history at UCLA, etc. And I'm sure that's unusual in a psychiatric practice. I have letters of thanks from loads of people, and what they all say is that their lives have been considerably widened because of therapy, and that's my goal. Okay.
As someone who's trained with Dr. Herskowitz, I can definitely underscore that fact. I think most people who've known him, both from a patient perspective or personally, their lives have been greatly enhanced because of it. Sure. Did everyone hear that? If people could turn off their cell phones, it would be helpful. In fact, I should turn off mine. Okay. If anyone hasn't signed our welcome page, registration page at the front, as they came in, we would ask you to do that at least when you're leaving. We'd like to have everyone's names and addresses. So.
Could you speak directly to point that mic?
Which one? Point this one where? Toward me? Okay. Okay, is that better? Does that amplify more? Okay. My name is Connie Hutsteiner. I'm a psychiatrist, and I do practice orgonomy, and I've been involved in the field since maybe 1980, when I was working as a singer and found I was having a lot of emotional distress and went to a workshop that was led by someone who had had experience with orgone therapy. And I was so blown away by the experience, I checked out all the books I could from the library about Wilhelm Reich, read them voraciously, and decided that's what I needed to learn more about. And so that's led me to becoming a physician and becoming a psychiatrist and now practicing orgonomy. And I feel like I've been given somewhat the daunting task of trying to explain the science of orgonomy in 30 minutes. And I don't know, many people here have read extensively in the field and maybe do understand how big a job that might seem to be. So I hope I do the subject a reasonable job of explaining it. Reich died effectively in prison because of his discoveries. So for all of us who are in the field, this issue of validity of his results or the significance of his results obviously takes on a particular importance. And unfortunately, his demise and the book burnings that accompanied it have greatly intimidated many, many people, in not just the psychiatric community, but in the scientific community, from pursuing orgonomy in a because people would like to also not have to be suffering the fates that he encountered. In fact, when I first was doing my research on Reich, I happened to be invited to dinner with my great aunt, who happened to be an extremely accomplished philosopher named Suzanne Langer, who was very well known also in her time. And she gave me great encouragement to continue with my research, but after I left dinner, told her son that she was very worried about me because I was doing just that. And she didn't want to discourage me, but she was very worried about my safety. And I thought I didn't know that until maybe 12 years later when her son told me that, which I appreciate his maybe having kept silent on it. But I think for anybody who's interested in the field, I think it's important to remember how much fear was generated in his lifetime and in the years following, for anybody who wants to break these boundaries of knowledge. And one of the things I feel like was important, one of the most important aspects to his ideas was that he incorporated human feeling into his concepts of science, hard science. Now that's extraordinarily difficult because we all know that anytime people are trying to study something as variable and ephemeral maybe as human sensation or emotion, we generally feel we can't quantify things and we can't come to concrete conclusions about things. But in fact, some of his early experiments in bioelectricity and skin potential or skin conductance were key to his pursuing this avenue of research of trying to identify a true energy that supports the function of emotion or sensation. And maybe some of you might be able to read some of those early experiments where he found that people's subjective perception of their sensations was key to alterations in the skin's capacity to conduct low levels of electricity. That means their subjective perception. That means how somebody feels about their feelings was really the be-all and end-all of their capacity to exist in the world. And that led him to seeing that there was this fundamental rule that he followed throughout his work of psychosomatic unity, where there was no way to separate the psyche and the soma anymore. They were one unit. And he pursued his therapeutic ideas, his development of techniques to dissolve the armoring, keeping this principle always firmly in mind. And that concept of psychosomatic unity, although one might think it would have held up to today, and I think it does in certain ways. I think that these ideas have penetrated into consciousness to some extent in the areas of medicine where people practice holistic medicine. But in his time, and certainly for many, many decades after his, since he began and developed these ideas, in fact, this concept of holism, of addressing the entire person when dealing with illness was considered pretty fringe. It's only lately become quite popular. Another aspect of his work that I think is very important was that he always wanted people to remember the fact that they, as observers of a scientific event, inevitably influence the outcome of the event. And he made it standard practice for in his scientific inquiry to always include the sensations of the observer in his overall evaluation of an event that would be observed. I know maybe there was the Heisenberg uncertainty principle did talk about this also, that it was very difficult or it was effectively impossible for subatomic events to occur without there being some influence of the observer on the event. And I think he's one of the few researchers who really integrated this concept into his work. I guess I have to ask if people here, I don't mean to jump ahead because there are so many experiments that Reich, or experimental fields of inquiry that Reich developed up to the point of developing the orgone energy accumulator. And they all are very important, and they contribute important pieces of information. I know we have some people in the audience who are extremely knowledgeable. Dr. Strick has done extensive research on Reich's work with the bions and could give a much better presentation than I could about them. But maybe suffice it to say that there was a battery of experiments that led to his developing this device called the Orgone energy accumulator. And with the accumulator, he really felt he was developing a device with which he could establish an environment in which he could test orgone energy and its phenomena. I myself have, I can tell you that the large kind of, there are large arenas of work of Reich's, so I don't mean to jump around too much, but he ultimately did use this accumulator in medical applications, in other words, and experimental applications of all kinds. And that is really what led to his imprisonment, because claims were made that he was claiming this device, the orgone accumulator, was a cure for cancer, which he did not do. But he did find that this device that seemed quite simple, and in many ways hard to comprehend how it would function, did have a noticeable effect on people's health and their healing function. And out of his research with accumulators and out of his research with orgone energy and his concept of orgone energy, he also developed another device called, with which he was able to influence weather patterns, and that he named the Cloudbuster. And his research in that arena at the very end of his life is quite remarkable. I know when I first became interested in Reich, I was fascinated by that part of his life. And he spent a good period of time in Tucson, Arizona, about 5 months, in order to see whether or not he could influence weather patterns in a desert region. And he did. He influenced them phenomenally, in fact. And he wrote about his work, or at least his efforts in Arizona, in his final book called Contact with Space, a book that is unfortunately now much more available, but certainly when I was starting my research, almost completely unavailable. And it's an important book. It's a log book, essentially, of sorts, that describes his efforts there in Arizona. What I feel I was happy to be able to do when I did my research on Reich was to go to Tucson and see actually what his results were by evaluating the newspaper reports and the weather, the federal and state agencies for weather reporting, their weather results as well, to see what sort of effects he was able to create. Now, he himself did not do this work, because after he finished his work in Arizona, he went home. And so he didn't stay to observe what the following 6 months brought as far as weather changes were concerned. But I can tell you this is in our most recent journal, which is for sale out in the foyer, I address this issue. In fact, the weather changes that were seen in Tucson and in Arizona were a radical departure from the norm. In fact, I spoke with a meteorologist who said that that year was in fact famous in Arizona weather history because it was so very, very abnormal. There was rain at the point of severest drought. Rain, in fact, the highest rainfall that had been seen in, it was actually over 100 years in the Tucson area. It was the second wettest year in the history of the state. I think this is important also when you're trying to consider why people were very frightened of his work, potentially. None of us can really know everybody who was involved with his final demise and what forces came to bear. But it certainly would have troubled a number of people to think that there was anybody who had the capacity to influence weather events in that way, particularly when they themselves did not understand the science behind it. There are, as Moritz said, there are researchers who've continued to work with all these devices that Reich developed. And their work is available to read, and their work, I think, is quite remarkable. There are James DeMayo, who has a research laboratory in Oregon, has done an extraordinary number of attempts at influencing weather patterns in very severely drought-stricken regions of the Middle East and Africa, as well as in Southwest United States, with remarkable results, consistently remarkable results. And they have, maybe someone here knows more